This is the Post Shift Podcast, a raw look at the hospitality industry. Hello there, Post Shifters, and welcome to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. So during Whisky Fest, I banked in a ton of interviews. I think I did somewhere in the lines of 5 or 6 in a space of 24 hours, which was huge. Yeah, if you've ever interviewed anybody, it can be a very mentally straining sort of endeavor. But I did get to sit down with one of my favorite brand ambassadors from 40 Creek, Mr. Chris Thompson, and get to learn some very interesting things about him, purely because when I do these episodes, if you've ever listened and sort of understood how I do it, I don't do a lot of research, so I usually go in and just sort of like throw out questions and then pull in some information I want to. So there's a couple of big surprises that I was taken aback and off guard in this episode. So I really hope you enjoy this episode, guys. Enjoy your weekend. I'll chat to you real soon. Bye.
Introduce yourself to the viewers, listeners at home.
Sure. Chris Thompson, North American brand ambassador for the greatest Canadian whiskey made in Grimsby, Ontario. No, from 40 Creek Distillery, Grimsby, Ontario.
So how long have you been with 40 Creek? In all capacity?
Coming up on 10 years now.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I know. It seems it's...
I felt like it was longer than that.
No, and it's
aged horribly.
Thank you.
40 Creek.
It kind of feels like I've been there forever. It really does. But when somebody asked me that the other day, and I'm like, I don't know, it's got to be like 12, 13 years. And then I actually looked it up. I'm like, no, it's not quite 10 years yet. So, yeah.
So where did, what's your, I always ask what the origin story of Chris Thompson is. And I'm not talking about like conception, what's your background? Because I usually find... The reason why I asked this question, I'm going to give you some context, is when I sat down with Davin, last year, and I was like, what did he do before Canadian whiskey? Before he became the Canadian whiskey god that he is.
Right.
He's like, he was basically a missionary, gave help and stuff like that to third world countries.
A lot has become very crystal clear about Davin.
See? And as soon as I was like, dude, that makes so much sense. He's like, why? I'm like, because you just give, and you give, and you give, and you're the nicest guy in the world. Mm-hmm. Like, everything you just told him. And apparently when he was traveling around, he was collecting whiskeys and stuff like that. And when he got back home, he's like, Canada's got some great whiskeys. And he started exploring that, and that's what sort of... He also has a great rule, which is a freaking epic rule. So he has this massive collection of whiskey, mainly a lot of Japanese and stuff. Once a bottle hits $1,000 at auction, he cracks it.
I love that. I love that.
So he has all this stuff from back then, stuff from his trips.
Yeah.
But now when it hits $1,000 on the auction, he's like, yep, cool, cracks it and starts drinking. I'm like,
that's commitment.
That is awesome.
So great.
You could cash in hard on that.
Yeah, but no.
He's like, nope, gonna drink it.
Love it.
So what's your origin story?
I actually started off my career, I was in the music business. So I was a college entertainment programmer for years, and left that, and then did concert tours and production management and festivals, and the music industry is still my first love.
Really?
And I still dabble. I probably still do 30 shows a year, just for fun. My wife always gets mad because she looks at the calendar going, oh, you got a couple of days off here. And then I'm like, yeah, by the way, I'm going to mix this, crappy little band at wherever.
So this is more, you're not necessarily a performer, but you're like producer behind the scenes. Sort of
technical side. Absolutely. Yeah.
Any famous bands that you've done?
Oh yeah. I have done tours with the Backstreet Boys and Rod Stewart, and only Canadian show of the original lineup of Black Sabbath I was the production manager for.
See, this is why I love asking, because we could have just got into the nitty gritty of talking about 40 Creek, do a fantastic propaganda piece about 40 Creek, but seriously, Backstreet Boys and stuff like that.
I was on the road with I Mother Earth for a few years. So it's great. It's fun.
This is the people are like, oh, why do you do your podcast? I'm like, this is pretty much the reason. This is the reason why I do it.
Well, it was funny. We were at our Campari national conference in the U.S. a couple years ago, and they like to do these little, get to know your team. Yeah. And so one of the things was, can you find within our organization someone who knows the Backstreet Boys? And somebody figured it out. which was kind of cool. Out of a delegation of 1,000 people or whatever.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
So what made you what took you away from that? Because obviously you're still very passionate about it. I think I've seen certain Instagram posts of like records that you still play.
Yeah.
You've got a huge record collection. And music's still a very big portion of it. Oh, you just said your first passion.
Absolutely.
What took you away from that?
Well, it's a great way for a young single guy to make a living. And eventually I became none of those things. So we, my wife and I started to have kids, and I'm like, you know what, this is not the way we're going to do it anymore. Yeah. So I did a little, I kind of took that experiential, and part of the things that I did as well is I built, when I wasn't on the road, I would get hired by different companies to go and build like corporate brand experiences.
Okay.
So it all became really about, how do I present, how can I present certain brands in a very compelling, interesting, engaging way?
Not just a tote bag at the front door and
Yeah. So, it's about creating an experience and creating a vibe and finding ways to endear certain products to people. And so that became, kind of one of my things that I just learned how to do. And so I did some corporate event planning.
What year was this?
Oh, boy. This would be 90s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I always like to remind a lot of kids who listen to my podcast, like, the internet was not really a thing.
Oh, God, no.
Until, like, the very early 2000s.
Yeah.
Facebook didn't really come around until, like, 2007. And so, like, when we talk about, like, real, like, marketing and corporate events and stuff, like you really had to hit, like, it was really like a face-to-face, shaking hands, like phone calls, faxes.
That's exactly how it was,
It wasn't like, I'm just going to do a Facebook group. No. Invite 1,000 people, and I know it's going to be successful.
It became, and that was the whole thing. How do you get a whole whack of people to come to an event or support a particular brand or come to a show? How do you do that without the internet? It was, print advertising and direct mail and all of this crazy stuff that, quite frankly, just doesn't exist anymore. Yeah.
Like posters on the posts and that sort of thing.
So, and then I was, I had wrapped up a couple of projects, and I was on vacation with my wife and my kids, and I get a phone call from this recruiter friend of mine who says, "Listen, I got this cool little project that I think you might be interested in." And she goes, "There's this family, and they have this great property, and they want to open up a winery, and they need a GM." And I'm like, "Why are you calling me? Like, clearly." She goes, No. This is not some, typical winery kind of project. She goes, "I know you're, and by the way, I've been a lifelong whiskey fan. I'm also a bit of a wine nerd too. So it's been, a few more of my passions."
And just because it's a passion doesn't mean it's going to actually pay the bills.
Right, exactly. It was just something that I enjoyed and pursued for fun, just like the music industry. But so she goes, No. I think because you're kind of into this, building brands and finding ways to connect projects with people. So I think this might be kind of cool. I'm like, fine, whatever. Let's set up the meeting. And I was there for 10 minutes meeting the family, and I'm like, yep, I'm in. This is going to be awesome. And so they wanted someone to, show them how to do it, build the project up, and then eventually hand the keys over to the family sons to run. And it was great. So I was in the wine business, for a few years. And
is the winery still around?
Oh, yeah. Ravine Vineyard in Niagara Lake, Ontario.
Okay.
Spectacular project. Awesome.
And so did that just segue straight into 40 Creek?
It segued literally directly into 40 Creek. So when I started to wrap that project up, I was, and literally 6 months, my last 6 months with the winery, my next door neighbor were downstairs watching a hockey game or basketball or something, and we're doing he's got these brown paper bags. He goes, "Listen, I want you to taste a few of these whiskeys, and I'm curious to see what you think." I'm like, all right. So we did a blind, and one of the whiskeys was 40 Creek. And I'm like, oh my God, like I don't really know anything about these guys. So they're like, yeah, they're just down the road from us in Grimsby. Literally 6 months later, I went to work for the company.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what drew you to 40 Creek outside that tasting?
Well, what I loved is when I joined the company, 40 Creek was still kind of, it wasn't the name on the front door at the facility. It was still Kittling Ridge Wines, but they were doing this cool little whiskey project. And to me, just when I sort of started to dive in and learn a little bit about, their story and kind of their approach to the business and everything, and that coupled with the fact that it was the first Canadian whiskey in a long, long time that it got my attention.
Back then it would have been one of, this was before the craft distilling movement completely. Outside of your big guys, it would have been one of the very first new distilleries in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
That was a Canadian, outside of Glenora, I think, was around that time as well, and Nova Scotia. But it would have been one of the first big distilleries making Canadian whiskey for the first time in 120 years.
The last significant successfully launched Canadian whiskey out of Canada was Crown Royal.
Oh, Jesus!
And it was them. And then 60, almost 70 years, and then 40 Creek.
Yeah.
So there was this, this huge vacuum of, and we always like to think of ourselves as kind of dare I say, Canada's first craft distillery. We may be, I don't know, but yeah, that 40 Creek was just doing things in a different way, and it was really compelling to me.
What role did you take when you first went to 40 Creek?
When I went to them, the only opening that they had.
Oh, so you went to them? You didn't they didn't advertise for a job?
No.
Oh,
well, they were. So what they were advertising for was someone to run their we have a small retail tasting bar. And so I dropped my resume off and I talked to a few of the people there, and I'm like, listen, I really, this whole thing you're doing here really interests me. And I meet the manager just kind of socially at the store, and she's like, you are grossly overqualified for this job. Why do you want to do this? And I said, because this project seems fun to me. I know you're doing the wine thing here, which is great, but this 40 Creek thing that you're doing, this is going to be awesome. And it's something that I really want to be part of. And I will take any job. I will take a huge haircut in pay because I think this thing's going somewhere. I want to be part of it. Yeah.
And so you would... A tasting room attendant?
Yeah, tasting room, little tasting room junkie.
And what year was this?
Almost 10 years ago, yeah.
So when people say dropped your resume off, it actually meant you actually physically dropped your printed
resume. Yeah.
It wasn't an email or a Facebook message.
Yeah.
And so 10 years, man, and I thought it was way longer than that, purely from where you now that we know sort of the origin story to where you are now. So how did you progress? Did you progress quickly?
At 40 Creek?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And around that time, transitionally wise, are they still making a ton of wine?
Oh, yeah.
And the 40 Creek is still, even 10 years ago, it was still
40 Creek was definitely starting to catch some wind. John Hall had done a great job at kind of going out and, building this grassroots.
Because I think the first
fanaticism almost about the brand. It was really, it was starting to catch some pretty good wind.
Because I think 2011, maybe 2012 was the first time that I'd had 40 Creek getting romantic, getting John Hall in at Clive's. I think it was 2011, 2012. Yep. So it just is shocking to think about how quickly things have gone in 10 years.
A lot has happened.
I talk about patience a lot, but that doesn't seem like there's any patience whatsoever in this whole story.
There was, the only thing that we were patient about at 40 Creek was the whiskey making side of things. They took time to figure out how to do it right. I love that. John bought the little distillery in 1992, and him and Bill Ashburn, those guys took 8 years to figure out how to make great whiskey. So as soon as he bought the place, they weren't, they wanted to make sure that they got it right. So they took their time. No. And so the whiskey side has always been about time and patience and being careful and trying to innovate in ways that push the boundaries a little bit, but don't get too crazy. And that's kind of what I like about our company.
And so you went from like tasting room attendant.
Yeah. So and then I managed our little retail tasting room shop for a few years. And then I did a very brief stint as a territory manager, so one of our sales guys. I did that for less than a year, and then this role. So yeah.
Okay. When did you get hired as the brand ambassador?
I think I've been doing this now for
about 5 years.
5 years? Yeah, sounds about right.
Because at one stage it was you and I for the role.
Yes.
And I was glad that you got it. Firstly, there was no chance I was going to compete against someone who'd been with the brand since day one on a completely massive personal level with John.
Well, if there's someone that would have truly done the brand some justice, I'm sitting across from the table from him as well. So I think you would have done a great job.
So how's life changed for you professionally and personally since you took over? And I didn't know when you introduced yourself that you look after all of North America. Makes sense, but because you're starting to spread into the US.
Yeah, I mean, and the U.S. market was actually, in the early days when we were struggling to kind of get a foothold in Ontario, John Hall needed to find a place to sell a bunch of Canadian whiskey really fast. So he literally made a bunch of jaunts down to the southern U.S. and in particular Texas, and hand sold 40 Creek there, and it caught wind fairly quickly. There was a time in our very early days where we were way more popular in Texas than we were in all of Canada.
Wow.
That changed, which was great.
Which I think a lot of people, I've talked to Davin about this a lot, where everybody talks about prohibition being big for Canadian whiskey, and the history of Canadian whiskey is a whole long-winded story, but Texas and Georgia are huge markets because of the Confederate War. People got a taste for Canadian whiskey.
Absolutely. During
the Confederate War. It's insane. That, and still to this day, it hasn't dropped off or flopped or vodka or gin. It really is still strong. And I've been lucky enough that Davin travels there enough. He brings back special bottlings from Crown Royal and Heron Walker and stuff like that.
Canadian brands that you can't even buy in Canada.
And just for that market. Yeah. And you're just but why can't we get this awesome 100% extra proof virgin oak,
right?
Crown Royal in that they can get in Texas. Why can't we get this in Canada? It wouldn't sell. What do you mean it wouldn't sell?
And that's the crazy thing. I mean, it seems insane that in certain markets, Canadian whiskey is more popular in other pockets other than Canada. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, but it's completely true.
And so he's taken to Texas to sort of get a bump, in going. And so what were the hurdles you had? Because 40 Creek was still small. I know the Campari buy came around about that same time.
No, it was only about just 3 years ago now.
Yeah,
so yeah.
So you took a relatively brand new brand that was popular in Texas.
Yeah.
And you had obviously a little Ontario sort of push and that something, but
and a little bit, and we had some other pockets in Canada we were doing really well, Manitoba and New Brunswick in particular were kind of two sort of standouts. Alberta, we were barely a blip. BC, we were barely a blip. Yeah. So all that for us was, kind of uncharted territory
and
opportunity. Exactly. So what we needed we needed our own dedicated sales team, which Campari took care of right away when they acquired the company. But it was just about getting feet on the ground and getting as many people to try that liquid as possible.
And I think that a lot of youngsters these days, I always talk about youngsters, which I'm sure I'm going to get a bad comment one day. I'm going to get trolled somewhere, which I know. I always say,
come on.
I know I've made it when I get a troll, but I've always been very open with the fact that John Hall sort of paved the way for the transparency in Canadian whiskey in such a major way. Dr. Don is awesome, Tish is awesome, all the guys are awesome. But there's always been, I remember doing a massive, probably would have been about 4 years ago. I can't remember his name, Maximus. Anyway, he was from a university. He was talking about transparency.
Oh, Maxim, yeah. He was Brock University.
Yes,
yeah, he was professor there. Yeah,
he was talking about transparency, and we had an hour and a half long conversation, a number of occasions about how transparency in Canadian whiskey has always been a hush.
Right.
Like I said in the dinner the other night, Davin went to unmentioned Canadian whiskey distillery and spent 4 days in a shitty motel.
Yeah, waiting to get in.
Because he'd show up and like, yeah, no, we can't let you in today. Or no, we can't. It was like, because of like certain things that had to be packed away so that he couldn't see.
Right.
He got his own freaking barrel select out of the distillery eventually as well. But I think it was a massive sorry. But I think that John sort of pushed that sort of... I remember 2011, like, sitting down, like, talking about this Meritage blend. And, like, for probably 3 or 4 years after that, I always thought 40 Creek was the only Canadian whiskey distillery to do that.
No.
And then all of a sudden, everybody's...
We all do it.
We all do it. Yeah. And he sort of set the tone where it was like, all of a sudden, like, oh, yeah, you know what? He's already telling everybody our secrets, so we may as well tell everybody our secrets as well.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, we chatted about it the other day, and you know, what was in the bottle was something you never really talked about. It's either you liked it or you didn't, and you had an opinion, but you never really talked about, you know, grain selection and types of barrels and all that. I mean, that's all new. That's new, and it's fun. So I'm blaming all of the wine nerds out there that have kind of, you know, forced that on the whiskey industry. But I think it's great because how these whiskeys are created and the artisanship that goes into a lot of them, it's art. It's hard work. And to kind of gloss that over as not being, you know, significant, it's a mistake.
So do you still have, even in this day and age, do you still have people go, no, I don't like Canadian whiskey?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah. Still a thing?
I get it. One of my favorite things to do, and I don't get to do it often enough, is I love hanging out behind the tasting bar at the distillery. Because we're right off the highway, so, you know, it's one of those things where literally people see distillery, free tastings, and they like cut off 3 lanes of traffic on the highway to come and visit us. But they get in there and they're like, listen, I don't really like Canadian whiskey, but, you know, I'm here, right? So, and then they have, you know, their first taste of some of the 40 Creek expressions, and they're like, this is Canadian whiskey? I'm like, yes, this is what Canadian whiskey can be.
Royal Wedding is not Canadian whiskey.
Yeah. So it's still fighting for respect, but we're certainly getting there, which is great.
So how many expressions do you have these days? On a core...
There's 5 core SKUs, and then always a limited edition for as long as it's kind of on the shelf.
So you got Barrel Select.
Yep.
Copper Pot. Double Barrel.
Cream and Spike.
Of course, yes.
Yep, the flavored. And then Confederation Oak, there's usually Confederation Oak around, and then whatever limited editions are floating around.
What's the limited edition right now? The Victory? I didn't taste that there.
Yeah, 40 Creek Victory. It's just won a gold medal at the Canadian Whiskey Awards, which is great.
How'd you do last night?
We had some really nice surprises.
Really?
In that... because it was the 10th anniversary of the Canadian Whiskey Awards, Davin, you know, was kind of doing a retrospect a little bit on, you know, kind of big influences over the last 10 years. And was very complimentary and gave 40 Creek Confederation Oak Canadian Whiskey of the Decade.
Oh, wow.
It's brought home, you know, consistently some of the highest awards of any Canadian whiskey ever.
It is delightful.
It's gorgeous.
It's so delightful.
And then also honored our founder, John Hall, for his contributions as whiskey maker of the decade. Which is a great testament. I mean, we're super proud of our history and you know, the legacy that he created, and certainly Bill was a big, significant part of that as well. And, you know, we're excited about kind of continuing and pushing the boundaries a little bit more.
I do like. I remember John explaining his first it was a John selection or John Hall selection or whatever.
John's private cask.
John's private cask, and he explained the story behind that one. Basically, just walking through the rick house and going, tasting barrels, like, oh, I like that.
I like that one.
JH.
Yep.
JH.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, I have 1,500 barrels. I'm not going to drink all this in my lifetime.
Yeah. And it's funny, still to this day, in our main aging warehouse at the distillery, there's still a whole bunch of barrels with the big X and his initials on them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and he just picks the really good stuff. He's like, I just realized I have way more whiskey than I'm ever going to drink in my life.
Well, and I always ask Bill, too. I said, Bill, why don't you... why don't you go and mark the barrels? He goes, because I don't want anyone to know which ones I like. I'm like,
you gotta look at a special little marker.
Exactly, yeah. So, but no, he
just blue chalk on the finger, just like on the edge.
And he knows literally. I mean, in that main aging warehouse, that's where we keep kind of all the special, interesting things, and then we have other satellite warehouses where our regular whiskey stocks are aged. But he knows literally every barrel.
And you said the Victory. How is that one aged?
So it starts off as a 4-year-old corn, barley, and high rye blend, which is fun. And then Bill did a high vanilla wood stave treatment on it. So basically, you heat these little bars of wood to a certain point where it starts to release significant vanilla notes.
Okay.
Drop a few of those staves right in the barrel. Left it in there for 5 months.
Make it 46 style.
Yeah. And then he took it out of there. Frankly, thought that it was a little too smooth, so he punched it up with a 10-year-old 100% corn whiskey aged in virgin oak. And then the secret ingredient on that whiskey is some very old, technically port, but Starboard wine.
Wow.
That we made back in the early days, in the Kittling Ridge days. Back in those days, we made port, we made sherry, we still make brandy to this day. So we've got a lot of,
Still make brandy to this day?
Yeah.
Is it under a special, like...
Nope, it's called small cask brandy.
Huh.
Yeah, available pretty much. I think it's an Ontario exclusive, but
I should try.
It's good.
I'm a big brandy fan.
I'm a huge brandy and cognac fan too.
Yeah.
It's cheap and cheerful, and it's good.
I gotta get you something from BC here. There's a brandy from Narromata, and it is on point.
All right.
It's only 6 years old, or 6 or 7 years old. But the distiller forgot about it in his... Like, he distilled it when they were in an industrial area.
Right.
By laws, they had to be in an industrial area, and then the laws changed about being in a homestead. So he took everything into his homestead except for the barrels. And so they sat in, like, a renter shed.
Just sat there
For 5 years.
Fantastic.
In Penticton heat and summer. So it's, like, reductive as hell.
Oh, my God.
It is epic. It's Pinot Noir grapes in Pinot Noir barrels. It's Lady of the Cask. I found it, like, 2 years ago, and I was, like... squirreling away because I was like, no one knows about this, no one's writing about it. It's been released for like 4 years, no one knows about it, and now all of a sudden everybody's like, this is fantastic, everybody should use this in cocktails. I'm like, no, you only made 3 barrels, that's it.
Definitely need to get my hands on that.
Your kids are old enough, they're all at a house now?
No, I have my oldest just got married back in November, so one gone, one still at home, which quite frankly I kind of like because just because I travel a lot. It's your skin. I know. So, and it's so funny when I took this job. I told my wife, I said, listen, there's going to be quite a bit of travel again. She's go, oh great. So I married a roadie again. So, I mean, when we were back in the early days, I mean, I'd be on the road for like 2 months. So at least it's not that bad. Yeah. But the travel's still fairly extensive, which I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with. I mean, I like being at home. I like being with my wife and kids. And
I love traveling, but you get sick and tired of the different beds and different bathrooms. And
So...
it's always exciting to get to do it, like a lot. Yeah,
but I love the work. It's great. It's I tell people I should probably not say it as often as I do. Job in the world. I do love it.
They're like, sweet, you don't have to get a raise this year.
Yeah. How much do you really like it?
So what's the plan for 2020?
2020 is big, kind of a big refocus on Ontario and our home base. I've spent a lot of time in the last few years helping to develop other markets. So, predominantly the West. So Alberta, BC, and now we're doing really well. So we can kind of take our foot off the gas a little bit. But where we're most mature as a brand is in Ontario, and frankly, we just haven't been as aggressive as we would like to be in there. So this year, it's going to be probably 70% Ontario.
Oh, nice.
And about 30% everything else.
Well, it's good for you on a personal level.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I'll get to spend a little bit more time at home. I'll get to spend, and when I say at home, but at least, I'll be home for dinner a lot of nights, which is great. I'll be able to spend more time in the distillery, which I love, and, hopefully get to hang out a little bit more with Bill in the lab and taste a few more things, and it's great.
Are you, is 40 Creek playing anything like insanely crazy? Oh, you already got that look. You already got that look on your face. I wish everybody could see that look. Man, I should be IGT living this hard.
I'm actually really excited about a few that are coming out. And I actually brought with me something brand spanking new. It's only available at the distillery right now. It's called The Forager. It's so out there that it doesn't even carry the 40 Creek brand name, but we make it. And it is a barrel-aged, hand-harvested, botanically infused whiskey. So kind of part gin, part whiskey. It's really cool.
Unsweetened Drambuie.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, and certainly in the Canadian whiskey category, and probably most other whiskey category, it's never been done before. At least not for, back in the old days of making spirits. That was the origins, and mostly for medicinal kind of purposes. But we kind of went back to kicking it really old school with this.
I get bored whenever I do a new spirit seminar. It's like, this got made for medicinal purposes.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a spirit out there that I haven't done an entry of like, and this was made for medicinal purposes.
So that one I'm super excited about. And then we've got a couple others in the hopper. I've already tasted next year's limited edition, which is spectacular. But we've got another couple in the hopper. And the nice thing is now that, once Campari bought 40 Creek, they needed to kind of figure out who we are as a brand and what we do and everything else. And there was all kinds of, organizational adjustments to make. So we kind of took our foot off the gas. We didn't kind of take our foot off the gas. We almost entirely took our foot off the gas with innovation. It was one of the things that 40 Creek was known for back in the early days was we made all kinds of really interesting things. Right. And we've gotten away from that in the last little while. So the nice thing is that I wouldn't say that we've freed up more of Bill's time, because every time when I'm driving to the airport at 4:30 in the morning, I see his van parked outside of the distillery. But certainly the push is on to go back and get back to innovation.
It's a huge transition. I think we talked about it at dinner the other night. It's a huge. Really, John Hall was 40 Creek for many, many years, and then all of a sudden it's like from a mom and pop shop where John knew all the little inner workings that he would never have written down or put onto a computer flash drive or anything like that to corporate.
Right.
And this is always a transition.
It's a big, our ability, back then was if we wanted to do something,
just did it.
We just did it. And it was, and frankly, a lot of it was left largely to Bill's responsibility. John's job was make sure people notice this brand and taste whatever we're doing. So he spent a ton of time being on the road and talking to consumers and our liquor boards and restaurant partners and bartenders and everything else. And Bill was always the guy behind the scenes grinding it out every day at the distillery. When John would come back, they would collaborate a little bit, and Bill would be left to, tweaking and finalizing blends and everything. So, we kind of got away from it a little bit, but it's back. And I love it whenever I go back to the distillery. I pass by the tasting lab, and when I see 30 or 40 different bottles and glasses and all this stuff, and I'm like, oh yes, it's gonna be fun.
So on a macro level, where do you see Canadian whiskey going in the next 5 years?
I think Canadian whiskey is poised for a huge explosion. I think finally people are really starting to understand the style and understand what Canadian whiskey is capable of. The great thing is that the evolution, and particularly I would say the last 5 years, the whiskey has gotten so much better. You're talking about brand new startups who have never made whiskey before, making some really spectacular stuff, and that doesn't always happen. With the craft beer industry, some of it's great and some of it's not so good, and that still happens with the craft spirits industry, but I noticed that there are lots of new players to the game that are making some really, really good whiskeys. Qualitatively, the liquid's just gotten so much better in a very short amount of time, and that will only help our category get more respect, get more notice. People just need to try it.
I think that's always the thing, is I always talk about the social media bubble, because we are all slaves to social media these days, but it's consumer facing, it's what you want to look at.
Right.
And so as bartenders especially, I find, like, we will get into this, like, oh, we're changing the world, and like we've made all the differences and all that sort of stuff, and then you go to, well, you do enough in-store tastings, you go to do an in-store tasting, you're like, oh shit, I've been doing this for 10 years.
I'll do 100 in-store tastings this year.
I've been doing this for 10 years and sacrificing so much and working so hard, and you still complain about Canadian whiskey. I have done nothing. None of my sacrifices have meant anything on the macro.
It really seems like swimming in the ocean sometimes, but...
then you get a random whiskey thing article about Canadian whiskey and everybody blows up about it. I'm like, yeah, but you still don't stock it at your bar.
Right.
Like, you still have 1 or 2 Canadian whiskey SKUs, and that's it.
Yeah. And it's still about education. It's still about changing people's perception. And I mean, we're winning the battle. It's been a long battle, and it's not even close to being over yet. But clearly, it's getting some well-deserved respect. And the great thing is that, you know, I said it earlier. I mean, the category's just gotten so much better.
Yeah. On that note, I think that's the perfect note to finish the podcast.
All right.
And I appreciate you sitting down, man. I'm so stoked. I love you so much. Like, I really do. Like,
I am. Listen, I relish every time I get to come to Victoria, because I love this community. I love what you did to help build the cocktail culture and the hospitality industry in this town. It's terrific. And
I'm just the oldest dude here. That's the only thing.
Nah. Well, you might be, but
thanks, buddy.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Post Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you're listening, whatever platform you're on, give me a good rating, subscribe, listen along. I'm going to keep going. I really enjoy sitting down with people and learning where they're from, what they did, and how they got to where they were. So if you love it, give me a good 5 stars. If you don't, give me 1 and I'll try harder.